was it like on the set of Little House on the Prairie? The actress who played Michael Landon's wife says it wasn't as wholesome as it seemed.
Little House on the Prairie was the biggest thing on TV in the 1970s.
Few television programs have portrayed the warmth, struggles, and togetherness of pioneer life quite like Little House on the Prairie. Running from 1974 to 1983, the Ingalls family became famous across America with Michael Landon, Melissa Gilbert, and the entire cast bringing Laura Ingalls Wilder's beloved stories to television screens in a way that felt enduring. The show's ending wasn't a simple goodbye, though. Instead, it finished with one of the most surprising moments ever shown on network television, leaving many viewers wondering what had happened. While it appeared to be just a dramatic plot choice, there was actually much more to the story, and Michael Landon was right at the center of it all. To understand why Little House on the Prairie made such a lasting impression, we need to look at how it began. The show premiered in 1974, adapted from Laura Ingalls Wilder's popular books about her childhood during the late 1800s. What could have been just another simple family show became something far more significant under Michael Landon's creative direction. He didn't just star in the program as Charles Ingalls. He also wrote scripts, directed episodes, and worked as a producer, which meant he controlled most of the creative decisions that shaped the show. What made Little House different from other family shows of that time was its willingness to explore difficult subjects. The program showed the harsh realities of pioneer life with remarkable honesty, covering topics like death, sickness, racism, alcoholism, and addiction. Episodes frequently ended with bittersweet conclusions rather than neat, happy endings, which set it apart from other wholesome programs on television. Viewers appreciated this approach because they weren't just tuning in for heartwarming family lessons. They also wanted to see stories that confronted life's hardest challenges directly. By the early 1980s, things started changing and the show's viewership began declining. After almost 10 years on television, audience preferences were shifting, and newer shows were competing for attention. NBC made the decision to end the series, though the network allowed Landon room to create a proper conclusion. What happened next shocked viewers, not just because of the story itself, but because of what it represented both on screen and behind the scenes. The television movie Little House, The Last Farewell, aired in 1984, giving fans one final visit to Walnut Grove. Instead of a sentimental farewell, though, audiences watched in amazement as the town was destroyed with dynamite. In the story, a greedy land baron claims he owns Walnut Grove and tries to take it from the residents. Rather than surrender their homes to him, the townspeople make a joint decision that if they can't keep Walnut Grove, nobody will have it. In powerful scenes, families place explosives and blow up the buildings that had served as the backdrop for nearly 10 years of television history. For viewers, this was a shocking and emotional twist. The schoolhouse, the mercantile store, and even the homes that audiences had grown attached to were all reduced to rubble before their eyes. This was unlike anything television had seen before. After all, this wasn't just a fictional town. It was the actual set where actors, crew members, and fans had invested years of storytelling. What made it even more remarkable was that the demolition wasn't created with special effects or camera tricks. Landon had actually ordered the real set to be destroyed with actual dynamite. The choice was bold, but it wasn't random. Landon's frustration with NBC had been building for some time, and he had decided that Little House should end on his own terms. In his own words, he didn't want to see Walnut Grove reused as background scenery for another program or left to fall apart. By blowing everything up, he ensured that Little House ended with a clear, final statement both in the story and in reality. Cast members later recalled that the experience felt like attending a funeral. Melissa Gilbert, who played Laura Ingalls, described it as a long goodbye that was devastating but somehow appropriate. How did viewers respond at the time? Reactions were mixed. Some appreciated the symbolic farewell, recognizing it as a dramatic way of closing this chapter. Others felt it was unnecessarily violent, almost disrespectful to destroy such an iconic setting. Fans who expected a tender, nostalgic ending were instead confronted with explosions and loss. For many, the memory of Walnut Grove going up in flames left them feeling unsettled. Just like that, the finale became one of the most memorable episodes in television history. The truth about the show's ending is more complicated than it might seem. While it might look like Little House on the Prairie was canceled because of this episode or Landon's creative choices, the series was never pulled as a result. Landon certainly had much to do with how it ended, but the series itself had already finished due to declining viewership. The destruction of Walnut Grove was simply his way of closing a story that had lasted for years. Interestingly, over time, fans have retold the story of Walnut Grove's destruction as if it were a punishment from the network or as though the violence of the scene got the show banned. In reality, the finale was broadcast and even shown again a few times, but it didn't have the same lasting presence in reruns as other episodes. Networks often preferred to replay lighter, more family-friendly storylines, and considering how bleak the finale was, it was rarely shown again. Over time, this absence contributed to the myth that it had been taken off the air. While the dramatic demolition of Walnut Grove may have been the most striking on-screen ending, the real conflicts came from what happened behind the scenes. Even Little House on the Prairie, that symbol of frontier charm and family warmth, had its share of unusual mishaps, small mistakes about timing, costume problems, and odd moments that escaped the editing process. One amusing timeline oddity involves Laura's pregnancy during the 7th season. Viewers noticed that despite warm, blooming scenes suggesting spring had arrived, Laura remained heavily pregnant well into the following summer, prompting fans to joke that Prairie time just moved at its own pace. Then there's the famous Nellie Oleson with her perfect curls. Fans might be surprised to learn that Alison Arngrim's golden ringlets weren't natural. They were wigs, secured firmly onto her head with metal combs and pins. The process was so difficult that some stories even say it caused her scalp to bleed occasionally. Perhaps the most amusing mistake involves a time-traveling chicken businessman. In a Season 8 episode, Colonel Sanders appears to pitch a fast food deal in Walnut Grove. The problem is that both the man and his chicken empire didn't exist until the mid-1900s, long after Little House's pioneer era. Fans have joked that the fried chicken on set may very well have been from KFC. Not all errors were about funny time problems. Some were more practical mistakes. In a holiday episode set in the cold streets of Minneapolis, you'll notice characters walking around without coats. That's because the show was actually filmed in scorching Tucson, Arizona. There were costume slips too, like a glimpse of Caroline's modern-style undergarment and hairstyles that looked more 1970s than 1870s. Men were mostly clean-shaven too, clashing with the bearded styles common in that era. There's also the sight of a dummy falling from a train during a stunt, a visible stand in that can betray even the most dramatic sequences. Not all behind the scenes moments were serious either. Landon enjoyed pulling pranks between takes, most famously involving frogs, causing laughter amid the strict pioneer atmosphere. There's also casting trivia that brought future stars onto the Walnut Grove stage. Sean Penn had his television debut in Season 1, and Jason Bateman appeared as James Cooper Ingalls. At the heart of Little House was Michael Landon, who was far more than just Charles Ingalls, the devoted pioneer father. Landon was the driving creative force behind the show. He wrote many scripts, directed countless episodes, and worked as an executive producer. Essentially, it was his show. He had achieved a level of control that let him shape Little House into something often deeper and darker than people expected from a family drama But with that power also came conflicts with networks, producers, and even his own castmates. One of the earliest disagreements was between Landon and Ed Friendly, the show's co-creator. Ed had helped develop the series for television, but he soon found himself pushed aside. Landon's vision for the show differed from Ed's more traditional, family-friendly approach. Landon wanted to tackle serious subjects and push the boundaries of what was acceptable for prime-time audiences. Ed thought the show should stick closer to Wilder's original books. Soon, their creative differences grew, and before long, Landon's dominance on the set meant his counterpart was effectively removed from the process. Though his departure happened in the earlier episodes, it was a sign that Little House would be guided almost entirely by Landon's vision. The conflicts didn't stop there. Landon's relationship with Karen Grassel, who played Caroline Ingalls, was especially complicated. On screen, Charles and Caroline were the foundation of the Ingalls family, steady, supportive, and loving. Off-screen, though, Grassel often felt overlooked and undervalued. She later revealed that she struggled to get fair pay, claiming that Landon refused to give her raises that matched what other stars on NBC dramas were making. In interviews, she admitted that she felt disrespected by his treatment, describing Landon as both charismatic and difficult. Their clashes weren't always about money. Grassel also recalled moments where Landon made crude or insulting jokes on set, which she found humiliating. Though the two later reconciled years afterward, during the show's run their relationship was often strained. It's ironic, really, because for a series built around family values and respect, it was a reminder that the reality behind the camera didn't always mirror the storylines being told on screen. Still, Landon wasn't universally disliked. Many cast members adored him and credited him with guiding their careers. Melissa Gilbert, who played Laura Ingalls, often spoke of Landon as a father figure. She was just 10 years old when the series began, and Landon took her under his wing, protecting her in an industry that could have easily taken advantage of her. She described him as both strict and affectionate, a man who set high standards but also gave her a sense of stability. Yet even she admitted that Landon's control was absolute. He had final say over storylines, tone, and casting decisions. That meant when disagreements broke out, his voice was always the loudest. Alison Arngrim, who played the infamous Nellie Oleson, once shared how Landon could be blunt and intimidating if he felt actors weren't performing well enough. Though she acknowledged that intensity was inspiring, most times it felt exhausting. Another disagreement worth mentioning came near the end of the show's run, when the network itself clashed with Landon. NBC was ready to move on from Little House, but Landon felt the series still had potential. Ratings were falling, but he believed that with the right storylines, audiences could be drawn back. NBC disagreed. To them, the series had run its course and the best thing was to end it. The two sides argued, and eventually they reached a compromise to end Little House on the Prairie after its 9th season and continue with a short-lived spin-off that shifted focus to Laura and Almanzo. Without Landon at the center, though, the spin-off struggled, lasting only 1 season. These creative tensions with NBC also played a role in Landon's decision to destroy the Walnut Grove set. From his perspective, NBC hadn't respected the show's legacy, and he wasn't going to leave behind a set that could be casually reused. But while he comes across as a man willing to do anything to protect what he cherished, Landon wasn't exactly perfect in his personal life either. When he began working on Little House, he was a married man. However, his marriage vows weren't enough to stop him from becoming interested in the show's makeup artist, Cindy Clerico. Unfortunately, while he was still married, he began a relationship with Cindy. The affair caused quite a stir among the cast and crew. Not only was Landon having an affair while married, but Cindy was also 20 years younger than him. As expected, the affair caused strain in Landon's friendships with his castmates. However, questionable as the relationship was, it appeared to be genuine. They married in 1983 and remained together until Landon's death in 1991. While Landon's relationship with Cindy eventually led to a lasting marriage, it wasn't without consequences. The affair left deep wounds, particularly among his closest friends and co-stars, including Melissa Gilbert. She had always viewed Landon as more than just a boss. After her adoptive father passed away, she grew close to the Landon family, especially since she was best friends with Landon's daughter, Leslie. To her, he became a genuine father figure, which made his betrayal feel all the more personal. Hurt and disillusioned, she held on to her anger for nearly 10 years after Little House ended, refusing to reconcile with him. But time eventually softened the silence. She made a surprise appearance with Landon on The Tonight Show, and in private, they finally made peace. Tragically, just a week later, Landon passed away from aggressive pancreatic cancer. Their reconciliation was brief, but at least it allowed them to close the chapter on better terms. Before judging Landon too harshly, though, it's important to remember that conflicts weren't always hostile. Sometimes they showed the passion of a cast and crew who cared deeply about the work. Little House demanded long filming hours, emotional performances, and often uncomfortable conditions on set. Cast members endured extreme heat, heavy costumes, and challenging outdoor shoots. Frustrations naturally arose, but they also bonded over the shared struggle. Melissa Sue Anderson, who played Mary Ingalls, once described the experience as both exhausting and rewarding, a show that tested its cast but also gave them unforgettable memories. For Anderson, one such memory is possibly the fact that she and co-star Melissa Gilbert never really got along. It's hard to believe, but the behind-the-scenes reality was very different from the on-screen portrayal. While the two might have looked like the perfect pair on screen, the truth was that these young women never actually liked each other. The simple answer is that Gilbert couldn't bring herself to warm up to her co-star, even years later. In her memoir, she didn't hold back, calling Anderson cold and stuck up. And Gilbert wasn't alone in that impression. Alison Arngrim remembered how early on Gilbert had pulled her aside with a warning about Anderson, calling her dangerous and saying she hated her. At first, Alison tried to bridge the gap herself, but she quickly found Anderson difficult to reach, describing her manner as oddly artificial, like a well-trained beauty pageant contestant, and admitting that after a while, simply being nice to her became a sort of patience exercise. Gilbert confessed in her memoir that although the two were cast as sisters, there was never a real sisterly bond between them. She wrote that there was a distance to Anderson, a coldness, and that she wasn't easy to get along with. Looking back, Gilbert also reflected that Anderson seemed to live entirely within her mother's universe, more controlled and guarded than open and expressive. That same tension between appearance and reality extended beyond the cast's personal relationships into the show's storytelling itself. Because for all its reputation as wholesome family entertainment, Little House on the Prairie frequently explored controversial subjects. For a show so often remembered as wholesome family entertainment, Little House on the Prairie didn't avoid controversy. From episodes that addressed assault and racism to romantic storylines that involved underage characters, Little House walked a fine line between daring television and problematic content. Looking back now, these moments show just how much cultural standards have shifted since the 1970s and 1980s. One of the most striking examples came in a two-part storyline from Season 7. In this difficult story arc, a character named Sylvia, a shy teenage girl, becomes the target of a masked attacker who assaults her, leaving her pregnant. For a family drama airing in prime time, this was nearly unthinkable subject matter. Audiences tuned in expecting tales of strength and morality on the frontier, not a brutal narrative about violence and the shame attached to pregnancy outside of marriage. The show portrayed Sylvia's trauma with unusual frankness for the era. She struggles with shame, secrecy, and the cruel judgment of others. For some viewers, the storyline was powerful and even ahead of its time, confronting a taboo subject with seriousness rather than dismissing it. But for others, it felt disturbingly out of place in a series often marketed as family viewing. Letters poured in, criticizing Landon and the producers for subjecting children to such dark themes. Today, many fans still debate whether this storyline was a brave attempt to spark conversation or a deeply inappropriate story that forever darkened the show's tone. Little House didn't only stir controversy with its depictions of trauma. Romantic storylines between adult and underage characters have aged especially poorly under modern examination. The most famous example is the relationship between Laura Ingalls and Almanzo Wilder, played by Dean Butler. In real life, Laura and Almanzo did marry, and the age gap was historically accurate. On screen, however, the situation looked very different. Melissa Gilbert was only 15 years old when she filmed the episode where Laura finally captures Almanzo's heart. Butler was 23. At the time, producers defended the storyline as faithful to the historical record. But the 8-year difference between the actors added an undeniable layer of discomfort. Gilbert herself later spoke about how awkward and vulnerable she felt filming romantic scenes opposite an adult man, while viewers in the late 1970s largely accepted the relationship as innocent and romantic. Today, such casting choices would almost certainly trigger widespread criticism. Given current awareness about power imbalances and the responsibility of protecting underage actors on set, Laura's storyline wasn't the only instance of questionable romantic plotting involving minors. Allison's character, Nellie Oleson, was just 13 years old when she appeared in an episode where she entertains romantic interest from an older teenage boy, a plotline that at the time may have been brushed off as lighthearted or even humorous. Yet by contemporary standards, the idea of pairing a 13-year-old character with an older suitor on a family show feels deeply inappropriate. Beyond matters of romance, Little House also created controversy when it turned to issues of race. In one Season 3 episode, the show tackled themes of racism and slavery through the story of a young black boy named Solomon who asks to be adopted by the Ingalls family because he believes a white family will offer him a better life. The episode was praised by some viewers for daring to address racial inequality on a popular family show, especially at a time when many series avoided such discussions altogether. Yet others criticized it for oversimplifying the harsh realities of racism and for framing the issue primarily through the perspective of white saviors. While Landon's intention may have been to spark empathy and deliver a moral lesson about equality in execution, the episode reflected the limitations of its time, along with a sentimental resolution that glossed over deeper systemic issues. Taken together, these controversial storylines show the complicated legacy of Little House on the Prairie. On one hand, the show was undeniably bold in its willingness to step outside the expected boundaries of family television. It brought conversations about assault, teenage pregnancy, racism, and social judgment into living rooms across America. For many viewers, this was their first exposure to such difficult topics, and the show's handling of them, even if flawed, was seen as courageous. On the other hand, the series often stumbled when judged by modern standards, either by placing young actors in questionable situations or by approaching serious issues with a perspective that now feels outdated. When Little House on the Prairie first aired, it was sold as wholesome family television, a safe, moral alternative in an era when much of network television was moving toward grittier realism. Parents trusted it, children absorbed it, and critics at first dismissed it as sentimental escapism. Yet as the series unfolded, something unusual happened. The show not only maintained its reputation for heartwarming, traditional values, but also became a starting point for more serious conversations. At the time, fan reception was overwhelmingly loyal. Families tuned in week after week, and the series consistently ranked among the top 20 programs in the ratings during its early years. Viewers wrote letters praising the way the show combined moral lessons with adventure, often thanking Landon for giving them something they could watch together across generations. Reruns only deepened its cultural impact, introducing the Ingalls family to audiences who hadn't been alive during its first run. Critics were more divided, though. Some praised the series for its ambition to tell more complex stories than its sweet reputation suggested. Episodes that centered on race relations in 19th-century America or the harrowing storyline about assault proved that Little House was willing to test the limits of family programming. Others argued that the show's blend of sentiment and tragedy often tipped into melodrama, with Landon accused of manipulating viewers' emotions through swelling music and tear-jerking performances. To some critics, it was the very definition of overly emotional television. As years passed, the conversation began to shift. Melissa Gilbert wrote candidly in her memoir about how deeply the show impacted her own childhood, but also how it forced her into emotionally demanding performances far beyond her years. She recalled crying so much on set that producers jokingly called her one "Take Gilbert" because of her ability to cry on command. To her, Little House wasn't just a nostalgic memory. It was a challenging experience of real, often difficult emotions wrapped inside a family-friendly package. That authenticity, she later reflected, is one reason the show has endured, because even when it tackled unsettling themes, it did so with sincerity rather than cynicism. In recent decades, as television has grown bolder in depicting trauma, identity, and social inequality, Little House has been re-examined through a different perspective. Scholars and critics now point out that the show was, in its own way, ahead of its time. While some of its portrayals now feel dated, the very fact that it attempted to address race, disability, addiction, poverty, and gender roles within the frame of a 1970s family drama has earned it respect. Many modern audiences are surprised at how often Little House strayed into morally complicated or tragic territory, something obscured by its wholesome reputation. This revaluation became particularly pointed when discussions of rebooting the franchise surfaced in recent years. Some cast members bristled at the idea of a modernized version. Allison noted that the original series had already tackled weighty subjects long before television executives were comfortable with such material. To her and others, there was nothing soft about Little House on the Prairie. It had already broken ground in a quiet but lasting way. The show remains a fascinating example of how television can be both comforting and challenging, offering viewers both escape and confrontation with difficult truths about life.